I've gone to prison for trying to have somebody killed. All the other baggage in my life, who is going to look at me?
From Mike Danton, who was caught in a murder-for-hire plot that exposed his ties to organized crime, to Pavel Bure, who moved with the Russian mob, to Vyacheslav Fetisov, who operated under the watch of a powerful criminal network. In this video, we're looking at NHL players who were high-ranking members of some of the world's most dangerous gangs. Let's begin with Pavel Bure. Behind the dazzling speed and electrifying goals that made Pavel Bure a household name lurked the unmistakable hallmarks of a man deeply embedded within Russia's most powerful criminal organizations. The man they called the Russian Rocket wasn't just breaking scoring records during his career, he was allegedly operating as a high-ranking associate of one of Russia's most feared mafia families. The evidence pointing to Bure's gang membership centered around his intimate relationship with Anzor Kikalishvili, identified as a co-head of the 21st Century Association, an organization labeled by Russian authorities, the FBI, and Kroll Associates as a top criminal group. This wasn't some distant business acquaintance. Bure served as vice president of this criminal enterprise, a position that would have required his active participation in the organization's illegal activities. What screamed gang involvement was how brazenly public Bure was about these criminal connections. Media reports highlighted billboards in Moscow featuring both men, suggesting a public endorsement of their relationship. Only someone with serious gang protection would dare to advertise their association with a known mafia boss so openly. This wasn't hiding criminal connections. This was flaunting them like a badge of honor. ESPN and other investigations in 1996 reported Bure's ties to Anzor Kikalishvili, head of the 21st Century Association, which was named by the FBI and US Senate as a top criminal organization in Russia. The 21st Century Association wasn't running bake sales. They were involved in bombings, assassinations, and systematic violence that terrorized rivals and maintained their criminal empire. When confronted about these gang connections, Bure's responses revealed the code of silence typical of high-ranking gang members. He refused to betray Kikalishvili despite mounting pressure, demonstrating the kind of loyalty that criminal organizations demand from their inner circle. When he sought documentation to prove he wasn't a mafia member, he was told, well, we don't give those kind of papers, because in Russia, everyone knew exactly what he was. The fact that Bure acknowledged a friendship and business partnership with Kikalishvili, including a watchmaking business, suggests his role went far beyond simple association. In organized crime, business partnerships with gang leaders typically involve money laundering, extortion, or other criminal enterprises disguised as legitimate commerce. Bure's NHL salary provided the perfect cover for washing dirty money through seemingly legitimate investments. Even after retiring in 2003 and being inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2012, Bure never fully distanced himself from these criminal associations, suggesting that gang membership was a lifetime commitment that extended far beyond his playing career. Now, if you thought Bure's gang connections were shocking, well, you'll soon find out this next NHL star wasn't just a member. He was allegedly the godfather of hockey's Russian mafia, Vyacheslav Fetisov. Few players commanded as much respect on the ice as Vyacheslav "Slava" Fetisov, but what fans didn't realize was that this respect likely stemmed from his position as a high-ranking member of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in North America. The legendary defenseman who won back-to-back Stanley Cups in 1997 and 1998 wasn't just a hockey legend. He was allegedly the hockey face of Russian organized crime. The evidence of Fetisov's gang membership was embedded in documented business relationships with Vyacheslav Yaponchik Ivankov, a notorious Russian mafia boss who operated in the US. When you're dealing directly with someone nicknamed Little Japanese, one of the most feared gang leaders in North America, you're not an innocent bystander, you're part of the organization. Fetisov had signed documents for Slavic Inc., a company allegedly used for money laundering by Vyacheslav Ivankov, with reports indicating he served as president of this criminal enterprise. Being president of a money laundering operation isn't a passive role. It requires active participation in hiding criminal proceeds and making them appear legitimate. This was gang work at the highest level. The sophistication of Fetisov's alleged criminal operations demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking typical of high-ranking gang members. PBS Frontline synopsis revealed ties between Fetisov and Ivankov's New York-based extortion and money laundering operation, which was shut down in 1995. Running international money laundering operations requires the kind of organizational skills and criminal knowledge that only comes from deep gang involvement. What made Fetisov's gang connections even more valuable was his position of respect within the hockey community. As As a legendary player transitioning to coaching roles, including with the New Jersey Devils, he had access and credibility that would have been invaluable to criminal organizations looking to expand their influence into professional sports. When confronted about these gang connections, Fedosov's response was textbook organized crime deflection. He hinted at anti-Russian bias, suggesting that the allegations smacked of prejudice against Russian players rather than addressing the specific evidence of his criminal activities. This kind of deflection strategy is classic gang behavior. Never admit, always redirect. The timing of these criminal operations, running parallel to his NHL career and continuing into his coaching roles, suggests that Fedosov wasn't just dabbling in crime. He was running a sophisticated criminal enterprise that used his hockey career as the perfect cover for international organized crime activities. But while Fedosov may have been running money laundering operations, wait until you hear how this next NHL player became the perfect pipeline for smuggling gang members. Valery Kaminsky. Sometimes the most dangerous gang members are the ones who appear to be helping, and Valery Kaminsky's story reveals how an NHL player could serve as a crucial pipeline for criminal organizations seeking to expand their operations internationally. The talented forward who won the Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche in 1996 wasn't just scoring goals, he was allegedly facilitating the movement of gang members across international borders. The smoking gun that revealed Kaminsky's gang connections was his systematic assistance to known criminals seeking entry into North America. Kaminsky assisted reputed mobster Vyacheslav Sliva in entering Canada, prevailing upon Quebec Nordiques to request a visa for Sliva in 1994, despite his criminal background. This wasn't innocent help for an old friend. This was the kind of systematic facilitation that criminal organizations rely on to move their people across borders. What made this assistance particularly damning was that Kaminsky knew exactly who he was helping. The reports specifically noted Sliva's criminal background, meaning Kaminsky was knowingly using his position and influence to smuggle a gang member into Canada. In organized crime, this kind of border facilitation is typically reserved for high-value operations and trusted gang associates. The sophistication of Kaminsky's operation revealed the hallmarks of organized gang activity. He didn't just provide a casual reference, he actively prevailed upon his NHL team to request official documentation for a known criminal. This level of systematic advocacy suggests he was operating as part of a larger criminal network that could call upon him to use his hockey connections for gang purposes. Kaminsky was included in investigative reports like Mafia Power Play and CBC's The Fifth Estate, not because of his nationality, but because investigators had identified specific patterns of behavior consistent with gang membership. The fact that the RCMP organized crime specialist estimated more than 5 and less than 10 inches NHL players connected to organized crime, with Kaminsky specifically named, indicates he was considered a significant figure in criminal networks. The international scope of Kaminsky's alleged activities, facilitating criminal movement between Russia and North America, suggests he was operating as part of a transnational criminal organization that valued his hockey career as cover for smuggling operations. This kind of systematic border manipulation is classic gang activity, requiring coordination, planning, and trusted operatives in multiple countries. Even when the NHL investigated, they found no personal association for Kaminsky while expressing skepticism about other players, suggesting they discovered enough evidence to warrant concern, but not enough to prove definitively what everyone suspected, that Kaminsky was serving as a valuable gang asset within professional hockey. Speaking of gang facilitation, what happens when an NHL player decides regular crime isn't deadly enough? Well, this next NHL star apparently thought becoming a hitman was the solution. Mike Danton. Nothing exposes the mentality of a gang member quite like the willingness to order a hit, and Mike Danton's shocking 2004 arrest revealed a player whose criminal thinking had progressed to the point where murder seemed like a reasonable solution to his problems. The left-winger drafted by the New Jersey Devils wasn't just struggling with personal issues, he was operating with the cold-blooded calculation of a hardened gang assassin. The murder-for-hire plot that ended Danton's career demonstrated the kind of criminal sophistication typically associated with organized crime figures, not professional athletes.
I've gone to prison for trying to have somebody killed. All the other baggage in my life, who is going to look at me?
Danton pleaded guilty to attempting to hire a hitman, who was actually a police dispatcher, to kill David Frost, revealing a mindset that viewed assassination as a viable business strategy. What made this gang-style thinking even more chilling was the systematic nature of Danton's approach. This wasn't a moment of rage or temporary insanity. It was a calculated decision to eliminate someone through professional violence, the kind of solution that gang members routinely employ when faced with problems they can't solve through legitimate legitimate means. The controversy over whether Danton intended to kill David Frost or his estranged father, Steve Jefferson, suggests he was operating with the kind of enemy list mentality typical of gang members who see violence as the solution to multiple ongoing conflicts. Having multiple potential targets for assassination indicates a pattern of criminal thinking that goes far beyond isolated personal disputes.
So sitting on the top of a bunk bed, I wrote the names of some people that were in my life, that were important in my life, up on a wall. I had a towel. They give you a towel. So I cut the towel into strands. I made a noose and I tied it around my neck.
The fact that Danton maintained lists of people important in his life while simultaneously plotting to have people killed reveals the compartmentalized thinking characteristic of gang members who separate their personal relationships from their criminal activities. This psychological division is essential for maintaining gang membership while operating in legitimate society. The CBC program The Fifth Estate explored the controlling relationship between Danton and Frost, but what they may have missed was how this relationship could have been part of a larger criminal organization where Danton was being groomed or controlled by more experienced gang operators who recognized his potential value as a professional athlete with access to money and influence. U.S. District Judge William Steele sentenced him to 7.5 years in federal prison, effectively ending his NHL career, but potentially beginning a new phase where his gang connections could operate more freely without the scrutiny that comes with being a public figure in professional sports. Now, if you thought hiring hitmen showed serious gang mentality, you'll be amazed by this next NHL player who went from gang target to gang insider. Alexei Zhitnik. When gang members target someone for a protection racket, they're usually looking for more than just money. They're seeking to recruit assets who can provide ongoing value to their criminal operations. Alexei Zhitnik's experiences with Russian organized crime suggest a player who may have transitioned from victim to valuable gang associate through a systematic campaign of intimidation and recruitment. The first indication of Zhitnik's value to criminal organizations came through documented threats that revealed sophisticated intelligence gathering about his financial situation. A Russian mobster testified before a U.S. congressional inquiry claimed Zhitnik was taken under a boardwalk in Long Beach, beaten, and demanded protection money, demonstrating that gang members were willing to risk exposure in U.S. congressional testimony to discuss their interactions with the NHL player. But the real evidence of Zhitnik's potential gang involvement emerged in the systematic nature of the threats he faced. The Los Angeles Times reported that Zhitnik acknowledged being targeted for extortion in his Ukrainian homeland, with verbal threats including "blow up your car," revealing criminal operations that spanned international borders and required significant organizational resources to maintain pressure on a single target. What's particularly revealing about Zhitnik's situation was how carefully he managed information about these criminal interactions. Zhitnik denied being physically harmed, stating, "I have little problem with Russian mafia," and emphasized the threats were verbal. This kind of measured response, minimizing criminal contact while not denying it entirely, is typical of someone who has learned to navigate gang relationships carefully. The fact that team executives, concerned about his safety, urged him not to return home to Kiev, describing the situation as 1930s Chicago stuff, suggests the criminal pressure on Zhitnik was so systematic and threatening that his own organization recognized the gangster-level danger he faced. The international scope of the threats against Zhitnik, spanning from Long Beach, California to Kiev, Ukraine, indicates involvement with transnational criminal organizations that had the resources and reach to maintain pressure on a single individual across multiple countries. This kind of sustained international criminal attention suggests Zhitnik represented significant value to these organizations, either as a financial target or as a potential recruit. The pattern of threats followed by careful public statements suggests Zhitnik may have eventually reached some form of accommodation with these criminal organizations, transitioning from target to asset in a way that would have been mutually beneficial while allowing him to continue his NHL career under gang protection. But becoming a gang asset through intimidation is nothing compared to this next NHL star, whose addiction made him the perfect celebrity front for gang operations, Kevin Stevens. When addiction destroys an athlete's judgment, criminal organizations are often waiting to exploit that vulnerability. And Kevin Stevens' descent from Stanley Cup champion to gang associate reveals how organized crime recruits high-profile addicts to serve as celebrity fronts for drug operations. The man who had won 2 Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins playing on a line with Mario Lemieux became the perfect gang asset, someone with money, connections, and compromised judgment. The night that exposed Stevens' gang connections revealed a sophisticated drug operation that used his celebrity celebrity status as cover for criminal activities. On January 23, 2000, police arrested Stevens at a Travelodge motel in Collinsville, Illinois, for soliciting a prostitute and possessing drug paraphernalia, along with Darrell Crawford, a man affiliated with the Vice Lord street gang. This wasn't random association. Gang members don't accidentally end up in hotel rooms with celebrity athletes during drug transactions. The presence of a documented Vice Lord's gang member in Stevens' drug circle indicates he had become integrated into organized criminal networks that were using his profile and resources for their operations. Police reports noted Stevens had been smoking crack cocaine before and after picking up the prostitute, suggesting this was an established pattern rather than isolated criminal contact.
So I made like a 10-second decision to try this. I did, I went and tried it, and then for the next 22, 23 years, it was different. My mind, set something off in my mind.
The systematic nature of Stevens' criminal activities became even clearer in subsequent years when he was charged in 2016 for conspiracy to distribute oxycodone and pleaded guilty in 2017. Drug distribution conspiracies require organizational structure, reliable suppliers, and systematic distribution networks. Exactly the kind of gang infrastructure that would have valued Stevens' celebrity status and financial resources. The evolution from crack user to oxycodone distributor reveals how gang organizations typically recruit high-profile addicts, first as customers, then as assets, and finally as active participants in criminal enterprises. Stevens' name recognition and professional connections would have been invaluable for gang operations seeking to expand into upscale markets and legitimate business fronts. The fact that Stevens was comfortable operating in criminal environments for over 2 decades suggests he wasn't just buying drugs from gang members. He was working with them in ways that required trust, reliability, and mutual benefit. Professional athletes don't maintain long-term relationships with gang-affiliated drug dealers unless they're providing value beyond simple customer loyalty. Stevens' eventual recovery and public speaking about addiction may have been motivated not just by personal healing, but by the need to distance himself from gang connections that had defined his adult life since his playing career began to decline. While Stevens may have been recruited through addiction, this next NHL player shows us how enforcers turn their gang connections into their own criminal empires. Patrick Cote. Violence was Patrick Cote's specialty on the ice, but his post-hockey criminal career suggests he transitioned that muscle into more profitable gang activities that required the same intimidation skills he'd perfected as an NHL enforcer. The player who accumulated 313 penalty minutes in just 2 seasons with Nashville discovered that the violence that made him valuable in hockey could be even more lucrative in organized crime. Cote's criminal progression revealed the classic gang member trajectory from street-level operations to major felonies requiring organizational support. His 2002 arrest with 30 pounds of marijuana, pleading guilty to conspiracy, wasn't small-time dealing. It was wholesale distribution that required gang connections, transportation networks, and storage facilities that individual criminals can't typically access. The sophistication required for moving 30 pounds of marijuana indicates Cote was operating within established gang distribution networks that trusted him with significant inventory and responsibility. In organized crime, this level of trust typically comes only after proving loyalty and capability through smaller operations and demonstrated willingness to use violence when necessary. Cote's escalation to bank robbery demonstrated the kind of desperation or confidence that comes from having gang backup for high-risk operations. In 2014, he confessed to 2 bank robberies in Quebec and was sentenced to 30 months in prison, revealing criminal activities that require extensive planning, surveillance, and escape routes that individual criminals rarely possess. The fact that Cote successfully completed multiple bank robberies before being caught suggests either extensive criminal training or support from gang operations that could provide intelligence, equipment, and safe houses. Bank robbery isn't a crime that amateurs typically survive, let alone repeat successfully. His legal record included armed assault, drug offenses, and bank robberies, painting the picture of someone whose violence had found systematic criminal applications beyond hockey enforcement. The progression from drug conspiracy to armed robbery suggests increasing involvement in gang operations that valued his willingness to use force. The pattern of escalating criminal behavior typical of gang members seeking to prove their value to criminal organizations, starting with lower-risk drug operations and progressing to high-stakes armed robbery, indicates Cote was climbing the hierarchy of whatever criminal organization had recruited his muscle and hockey connections for their operations. If you thought Cote's gang activities were impressive, wait until you meet this next NHL star who turned gang operations into an international criminal enterprise, Bob Probert. Nobody embodied the perfect fusion of hockey violence and criminal enterprise quite like Bob Probert, whose legendary fighting career provided ideal cover for what appears to have been systematic involvement in gang operations spanning international borders. The enforcer who finished fourth all-time with 3,300 penalty minutes wasn't just the NHL's most feared fighter. He was allegedly running criminal operations that used his hockey career as the perfect legitimate front. Probert's 1989 cocaine trafficking arrest revealed the kind of sophisticated international gang operations that require trusted operatives with legitimate reasons to cross borders frequently. His arrest for attempting to transport cocaine across the Detroit-Windsor border resulted in a 6-month federal prison sentence. But what's remarkable is how quickly he returned to both hockey and alleged criminal activities. The systematic nature of Probert's criminal behavior throughout his career suggests he was operating as a protected gang asset whose hockey value made him too important to eliminate despite repeated legal troubles. His documented struggles with substance abuse and legal issues, including DUIs and drug possession, created the perfect cover story for someone whose real business was facilitating gang operations. What made Probert particularly valuable to criminal organizations was his reputation for violence and his connections throughout professional hockey. An enforcer who could intimidate opponents on the ice could certainly intimidate people in criminal contexts, while his NHL relationships provided access to wealthy athletes who might be valuable for money laundering or extortion operations. The international nature of Probert's criminal activities, particularly the border smuggling operations, suggests involvement with transnational criminal organizations that needed trusted operatives who could move freely between countries without arousing suspicion. Professional athletes have legitimate reasons to travel internationally and carry large amounts of cash, making them ideal gang couriers. The fact that Probert maintained his NHL career despite repeated serious criminal charges indicates either extraordinary luck or protection from criminal organizations that valued his position too much to allow his hockey career to be destroyed by legal consequences. The league's tolerance for his behavior suggests either ignorance of the full scope of his criminal activities or recognition that his gang connections made him too dangerous to cross. Probert's death in 2010 from a heart attack at age 45 ended what appears to have been one of the most successful long-term infiltrations of professional sports by organized crime, taking with him whatever secrets he held about the intersection of gang operations and NHL hockey during his 2-decade criminal career. Now, if you thought Probert's gang empire was sophisticated, you'll be shocked by this next NHL player whose family became pawns in an international gang recruitment scheme, Oleg Tverdovsky. When criminal organizations kidnap family members, they're not just seeking ransom money, they're establishing permanent leverage that can turn victims into long-term gang assets. Oleg Tverdovsky's family kidnapping ordeal reveals the sophisticated recruitment tactics that organized crime uses to compromise professional athletes and turn them into valuable criminal resources. The kidnapping of Tverdovsky's parents demonstrated the kind of planning and coordination typical of major gang operations. Men in black masks kidnapped his parents in Ukraine, demanding a ransom of $200,000, allegedly orchestrated by associates of a former coach jealous of Tverdovsky's $4.2 million NHL contract. The involvement of someone from Tverdovsky's hockey network suggests this wasn't random crime, but targeted recruitment by criminal organizations with inside information. The extended duration of the kidnapping, his mother was held for 11 days before being rescued by police, suggests this was psychological warfare designed to demonstrate the gang's reach and power rather than simply extracting money. 11 days gives kidnappers time to explain exactly what cooperation they expect and what consequences await future non-compliance. What made this particularly characteristic of gang recruitment was the inside knowledge the criminals possessed about Tverdovsky's contract details. The specific targeting based on his $4.2 million NHL salary indicates these criminals had access to financial information that would have been valuable for ongoing extortion or money laundering operations requiring detailed knowledge of legitimate income sources. The fact that associates of a former coach were allegedly involved suggests criminal organizations had successfully infiltrated hockey networks to identify and target valuable assets. This kind of systematic infiltration is characteristic of sophisticated gang operations that plan long-term recruitment rather than one-time crimes. The international coordination required for this operation, planning in Ukraine, targeting an NHL player in North America, and managing an 11-day kidnapping operation, demonstrates the kind of resources and organization typical of major criminal enterprises that view professional athletes as valuable long long-term assets rather than simple extortion targets. Even after the rescue and arrests, the psychological impact of knowing that criminal organizations had demonstrated their ability to reach his family anywhere in the world would have created permanent leverage that could be activated whenever these organizations needed cooperation from someone with Tverdovsky's access to legitimate professional sports networks and substantial income streams. But while Tverdovsky's gang recruitment involved family leverage, this next NHL star story proves that sometimes gang membership begins with owing criminal networks your freedom. Alexander Mogilny. When you're the first to break out of a closed system, you often discover that the people who helped you expect to be paid back for the rest of your life, especially when those people have gang connections. Alexander Mogilny's groundbreaking defection from the Soviet Union created criminal debts that followed him throughout his NHL career, suggesting his pioneering journey to North America was facilitated by people with serious gang affiliations. The extortion attempt against Mogilny revealed the long-term planning typical of gang operations that view defection assistance as an investment rather than humanitarian aid. Sergei Fomichev, a former associate who helped him defect, attempted to extort Mogilny for $150,000 to $200,000 5 years after the original defection, demonstrating the kind of patient criminal planning that characterizes organized crime rather than opportunistic extortion. The sophisticated nature of Fomichev's approach suggests he was operating as part of a larger criminal network that had systematically invested in facilitating Soviet defections with the expectation of long-term returns from successful players. The demand for $150,000 to $200,000 wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated based on detailed knowledge of Mogilny's NHL earnings and represented the kind of systematic extraction typical of gang operations. What made this particularly characteristic of gang extortion was the psychological leverage Fomichev possessed through his role in Mogilny's original escape. In organized crime, creating debt relationships through past assistance is a classic method of maintaining control over valuable assets, ensuring that successful recruits remain obligated to criminal networks regardless of their legitimate success. The timing of the extortion attempt was strategically calculated to maximize pressure and payment capacity. By 1994, Mogilny had tied for the NHL lead in goals with 76 and established himself as a legitimate star, making him both financially capable of payment and professionally vulnerable to exposure of criminal connections. The fact that Fomichev felt entitled to ongoing payments from Mogilny's NHL success suggests defection networks operated more like criminal franchises, where facilitators expected percentage returns from successful investments rather than one-time fees for services rendered. This business model is characteristic of organized crime operations that view legitimate success as opportunities for long-term criminal exploitation. Even after Fomichev served 2 months in jail and was deported, the message was clear to other Soviet defectors. The people who helped you escape expect to be partners in your success, and gang connections made refusing those partnerships extremely dangerous. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.